Today we're going to be talking about mostly the class cards that were revealed, sort of the final stretch leading up to the big streamed event at Medivh's Tower and the party itself. So let's jump right in. First I want to talk about Moonglade Portal. This is a card that I think follows the lineage of quality healing cards that do enough to see play. We've seen a lot of healing cards in Hearthstone, and not that many of them tend to really have what it takes to see competitive play. One of the common themes of those that do is that they do something outside of just healing. We've seen lots of Holy Lights and Healing Touch style cards that don't really tend to really find a home in a lot of decks. The cards that do are things like Anti-Healbot, or Lay on Hands, or Ragnaros Lightlord, or Shield Maiden. Not exactly a healing card, but a card with effectively life gain attached to a body. Moonglade Portal is a lot like these. It provides 6 health for 6 mana, which isn't an incredible rate as far as pure healing is concerned, but the fact that it has a random 6 cost minion means that you're getting both significant value from it as well as very relevant board presence. 6 is actually a mana cost that has pretty good minions overall. I think the average is something like 5/5 for a 6-drop minion. And the 6 health that you get is a substantial enough number that it's very relevant against aggressive decks. I can easily see this card fitting into something like Ramp Druid or Yogg style Ramp Druid, both because, hey, it's a spell that helps your Yogg later on, but it also is something that can help keep you alive and allow you to generate a board presence that can fight back against sort of aggressive and tempo-oriented decks. I think that a lot of healing cards, the problem that you end up have with them is that they don't offer enough in matchups where the healing itself is not terribly relevant. If you play against, say, a Control Warrior deck and you have Holy Light in your deck, that's just kind of a dead card. But Moonglade Portal still offers a body that's relevant to the on-board presence of the matchup, and that's a very big deal. So I think this is a card that may very well just fit directly into decks that already exist in the metagame, and not necessarily even have to have any kind of deck built around it. So this is certainly a card that I expect to see in competitive play. Speaking of cards that I expect to see competitively, Menagerie Warden. This is a serious card. When I first saw it, thanks to the fact that I'm colorblind and can sometimes screw up the borders when I was just sort of looking at it on the screen from far away, I thought it was a hunter card. And I was like, wait a minute, you're telling me that if I kill that Savannah Highmane, my opponent gets the hyenas and I'm kind of screwed anyway. But if I don't, they can copy it, then I'm really, really screwed. Thankfully, it's a druid card. Or maybe not thankfully, since Beast Druid is looking like it has a lot of powerful tools already. Menagerie Warden fits on the curve directly after Druid of the Claw, which is obviously a pretty powerful beast that you can potentially copy. And if you do copy a Druid of the Claw, even if it is damaged, you're still getting a lot of value for the mana that you're spending. You know, you get a 5/5 for 6, which isn't good. You wouldn't play a 5/5 for 6 by itself, but you also obviously get whatever you're copying with the Warden. I think that Warden looks like it's likely to be at its best alongside Stranglethorn Tiger. Stranglethorn Tiger with stealth means that, you play a Tiger on 5, you play a Menagerie Warden on 6, and suddenly you have 15 power across the board, 10 of which is stealthed. That's really strong. It does lead me to think that maybe that alongside the power level of Conceal with Auctioneer still, maybe we need some more ways to interact with stealth minions. I don't really like stealth very much as a mechanic. I think that having stealth as something which can, offset the fact that, yeah, direct attacking is very powerful, that's a good thing. But when you have stealth interacting with really powerful mechanics like copy my guy or draw a card whenever you play a spell, because you can stealth whatever you want with Conceal, that ends up being really, really potent, and it feels like there's not enough ways for most classes to legitimately try to interact with that. In the case of this, for a lot of control decks, your answer is, okay, I guess I'm going to try and clear the board after they copy the Tiger, with Brawl? Twisting Nether. The fact that these are all big minions means they're out of range of most AoE effects, so definitely a difficult spot for control decks, which are already kind of in a difficult spot, it feels like, in Hearthstone right now. So I expect this to be a really powerful card in Beast Druid decks, which I would not be surprised are one of the stronger versions of Druid we see with the introduction of Karazhan. All right, next up we have Warrior cards. We'll start with Fool's Bane. Fool's Bane is a pretty interesting weapon because, the fact that it's a 3/4 for 5, that's reasonable rate in terms of just raw value getting from your weapon. But the fact that it has unlimited attacks each turn and it can't attack heroes. So This is a great weapon for clearing a board that can get cluttered. It's obviously very good against any deck that has a significant number of small minions, like great against something like Zoo. Previously, in many cases, a control or mid-range style of warrior deck against a deck like Zoo kind of had to lean really heavily on things like Brawl or Revenge, Ravaging Ghoul, in order to clear boards, and oftentimes something like Ravaging Ghoul can be easily defeated by playing a bunch of things with 3 health or 2 health, whereas Fool's Bane is obviously great against those, and not quite as powerful at clearing something like a Forbidden Ritual. This is a card that I think definitely can find a home in those style of mid-range to controlling warrior decks, because the immediate board tempo advantage you can get from Fool's Bane is huge, and if you're able to preserve your life total with armor gain effects or whatever else well enough to utilize the ability to just keep smashing away at your opponent's minions, this can give you enormous card advantage and tempo advantage as well. So I think that Fool's Bane is a card that will pretty certainly find a home in competitive decks once Karazhan is released. So Ironforge Portal, this is a card that I've kind of gone back and forth with on my opinion. When I first saw it, it seemed kind of bad to me. It didn't seem like the sort of effect that a lot of warrior decks would want. And I was thinking, they already have a lot of armor gain, so this is not really necessarily all that attractive. Then I realized that, other than Cthulhu warrior decks that have Ancient Shieldbearer, there isn't necessarily that much good armor gain for like a mid-range controlling style of warrior deck. Shield Maiden was actually very similar to Ironforge Portal. You got 5 armor and a 5/5 for 6 mana. This gives you 4 armor and a random 4-drop for 5 mana, so you're getting a little less armor and a lot less body. 4-drops are actually one of the statistically worst places on the curve to get a random minion from. From playing a lot of Forbidden Shaping, I'm aware of this, but there's just a lot of Battlecry minions there, things like Defender of Argus and whatever else. So the body that you get isn't necessarily great, but you get a pretty substantial amount of armor, which is great against tempo and aggressive decks. So I could definitely see Ironforge Portal potentially helping have a revival of those style of non-Cthulhu, sort of more traditional control or mid-range warrior decks. The problem, of course, still ends up being that those decks still need to fight against the Cthulhu and N'Zoth late games, which is another thing that has kind of pushed Control Warrior out. The just effectiveness of attrition in a world of old gods isn't nearly what it once was. That said, Ironforge Portal can go directly into a Yogg Warrior deck, which I'm sure is something that I will be trying when the expansion is released. So this is a card that I'm kind of on the fence about. I think that it could definitely find a home if the metagame sort of is pushing toward aggressive decks, and warrior decks want sort of more ability to fight back on the board while preserving their life total as well. Shaman cards. Wicked Witch Doctor. This is not a terribly exciting card to me. Whenever you cast a spell, summon a random basic totem. It's only a 3/4 for 4. It's obviously able to generate a lot of board presence as far as totems are concerned, but how much you actually want totems is not entirely clear to me. It obviously works well with something like Primal Surge, the totem buff card. But it works well with that and with Thunderbluff Valiant, but a big part of the problem with cards like this is just the fact that there's a 7 minion limit on the board. If you could just keep casting spells and summon tons of totems, that would be great, but you can't actually have a significant board presence and have a bunch of things from your Wicked Witch Doctor as well. So if this didn't say basic totem, which maybe Tuskar Totemic should have to avoid the, Tuskar Totemic into Totem Golem things we've seen so much this competitive season, it would potentially be a powerful card. But I think that with that, which I think is actually a important safety valve on this one, I think it is just not really at the realm of what you're looking to do. You require some enabling to get even, 4 or 5 worth of stats from it if you hit a Searing Totem, and it's not really a powerful tempo card, doesn't seem like an amazing value card either, just not a card I really expect to see competitive play. Maelstrom Portal, this is the Shaman Portal, deal 1 damage to all enemy minions, summon a random 1-cost minion. This is kind of a weird card, if you tack a random 1-drop onto Arcane Explosion, how good is it? Well, probably about as good as Arcane Explosion, because 1-drops aren't that big a deal, and Arcane Explosion is not that good. So, I can imagine a world in which there are lots of popular 1 or 2 health minions, and you play this alongside spell damage cards, and you're using that to blow stuff up. Shaman already has a lot of good AoE though. Shaman already has Lightning Storm. Shaman already has Elemental Destruction. So if you want the ability to clear off a bunch of stuff from the board, you already have it. And you don't necessarily need to play stuff to enable it to get kind of this minor value of getting a one-drop minion from it as well. So certainly not impressed by Maelstrom Portal. This is more relevant than it would be in a lot of other classes though, because Shaman does have Flame Tongue Totem at least, which can make more value out of a one-drop minion than most classes can. I don't think that's enough to really put it over the edge. I don't expect this card to really see competitive play. The one Shaman card I think might see play is Spirit Claws. This is a 1/3 weapon that has +2 attack while you have spell damage. That's pretty powerful. If you have anything that provides spell damage early on, like Blood Mage Thalnos, which is already very good in a Shaman deck, this is kind of like a better Fiery War Axe, and Fiery War Axe is one of the best cards in the game. You can potentially reinforce that. Obviously, you have your hero power, which can create a spell power totem, which gives you a 25% chance to enable this on turn 2. As well as any number of other things that you can play, Azure Drakes, probably you want some more early stuff, maybe even Kobold Geomancer in a deck that has a lot of spells. Could totally reasonably see that seeing play to help enable Spirit Claws. So I like the fact that this is a potentially powerful Shaman card, but also potentially powerful Shaman card that doesn't just naturally fit into existing Shaman archetypes. That's one thing that I actually think that Blizzard has been pretty good about, is making good cards for classes that are already good, that don't necessarily just fit into their good decks. This is a great example of that, and I'm excited to see what possible decks this could help enable. All right, let's talk about the Paladin cards, starting with Silvermoon Portal. Give a minion +2/+2, summon a random 2-cost minion. This is kind of an interesting card because it can combo pretty well with some stuff that Paladin does already. Any sort of minion buff is obviously good with Divine Shield. Paladin is good at sort of spreading out bodies in the board and helping use buffs to help small ones trade up, and this gives you the ability to help your smaller minion either trade up or eat something your opponent has and generate an extra body. 2-cost minions are actually statistically pretty decent. There's not like a wide range that you can sort of have fail cases. There obviously are things like Lore Walker Cho or Nat Pagal, but you're mostly getting something like a 3/2 or 2/3. It's a pretty small range in general. And the problem I see with this is that there's a lot of crowded space at the 4-drop already for Paladin. Paladin has great buffs there like Blessing of Kings already. It has True Silver, it has Consecration, it has what I think is one of the cards that really outclasses this, which is Keeper of Uldaman. In many cases, with Keeper of Uldaman, you're going to give a small minion a bonus and summon a 3/4, which is way better than give a small minion a bonus and summon a random 2-drop. Keeper of Uldaman also has a lot of flexibility in terms of just being able to hit your opponent's minions as well. So it's hard for me to see this really finding a home while you have so many good things that do comparable effects to it, like Blessing of Kings, like Keeper of Uldaman. Maybe there's a deck that wants all of them. Maybe there's a deck that wants just this and Keeper and not Blessing of Kings because it really wants to go wide. But it's just a lot of competition, both at the mana cost and in terms of the general effect of the card. I think this might be able to eventually be a card that finds a home, but not while so many competing things exist in the same space. So speaking of cards that have a lot of competition at their mana cost, Nightbane Templar is a very good 3-drop for Dragon Paladin decks. There's already a lot of good 3-drops for Dragon Paladin decks, though. Blackwing Technician is obviously a strong stat-wise minion at the 3 spot. And Aldor Peacekeeper is a good utility 3-drop. Not necessarily a minion you always want to play on 3, but still sort of fighting for that spot in some instances. Nightbane Templar, there's a lot of things about it that I like. I like the fact that it spreads out stats across multiple bodies. So it's less vulnerable to, say, just a tempo execute than a straight-up Nightbane Templar or Blackwing Technician would be. It works very, very well. This is one of the real highlights, I think, of Nightbane Templar. It works very well with what I was just talking about, the Keeper of Uldaman. The fact that you can not only have a 1/1 body to buff with your Keeper of Uldaman, but you even have a spare in case your opponent kills one of them. That's a really big deal in terms of the ability to play like a tempo style of game against aggressive decks that might already be on the board faster than you. I also really like the fact that distributing a bunch of stats across multiple bodies is excellent against Zoo, because Zoo is so good at tempo attacking into mid-range minions with stuff like Power Overwhelming or Abusive Sergeant. And Nightbane Templar, the fact that it has these multiple bodies, it's not really easy for Zudek to just keep tempo and keep pressuring your one thing you play per turn, because you're effectively playing 3 bodies that turn, and it makes it much more difficult for them to maximize the value of their combat pumps and take your minions down. So I definitely think that this is a card that can make a sort of more tempo-oriented, less late-game control-oriented Dragon Paladin style of deck potentially be a real factor in competitive play. Let's talk about the new Hunter cards. We will start with Cloaked Huntress. 3/4/4/3 is already a pretty solid body. It doesn't have a minion type, it's not a beast, so kind of a downside. Hunter has a lot of competition at 3. There's Animal Companion, Eaglehorn Bow, which are 2 of the great Hunter cards in general. This is generally going to want to go into the same deck as Eaglehorn Bow, so maybe having some problems there in terms of mana cost, but your secrets cost 0 is a very big deal. One of the big things about Hunter secrets in particular is that they're very tempo-oriented. We see a lot of Hunter decks moving away from having more than maybe 1 trap in their lists, and that's a lot because of the fact that with Mad Scientist gone, there's not really that much tempo value that you can gain from these traps. You spend 2 mana on a turn to play a freezing trap. In many cases, you'd rather just play a minion or use your hero power, because the games are so tempo-oriented that your opponent being able to play around your freezing trap with a 1-drop, you've just lost a ton of tempo and you fall behind the board. Cloaked Huntress really shifts that, because not only is it a good tempo play as a meaningful 3/4/3 drop on its own, but allowing you to play this and then also play a freezing trap from your hand, play a explosive trap from your hand, most likely a freezing trap, probably the best tempo secret that Hunters have. That's just a very powerful turn. You don't get the same value you do from the body of Mad Scientist searching up the freezing trap, but you get much the same tempo effect that you did from your Mad Scientist getting that freezing trap into play for free. So I definitely think that this is a powerful card in Hunter decks that want to use secrets. As to whether secret Hunter decks with Cloaked Huntress will be better than just straight up Beast Hunter decks with good minions up the curve to Houndmaster and Call the Wild, that remains to be seen. But I do think that this is in itself quite a powerful card that can lead to some strong tempo turns from Hunters. So definitely a card to look out for that I expect to see significant competitive play. All right, so Catterick. This is a really interesting card. I'm kind of torn on it because on its face, it's 2-cost conditional 4/2. It is a 4/2 with stealth, which is a big deal because your opponent can't just play around it and trigger it, then immediately kill your Panther that you get. So there's definitely some value there. It's an interesting card when you're playing it, especially when you're playing against decks that are using spells to remove your minions and are trying to do that in sort of a tempo-based way, especially if you can combine it with Cloaked Huntress. If you can play a Cloaked Huntress into Catterick and your opponent tries to use a spell to kill your Cloaked Huntress or something else in your board, getting the 4/2 Panther for free can be a huge tempo swing in the early game. So it's unfortunately, though, if you have to actually spend mana on it, you can spend your mana on this, and then you're not really doing anything to impact the board. And Hunter, as it exists now, and kind of how it's always existed, is a very tempo-based class. It really cares about having good stuff interacting with the board, having board presence, and maximizing what it's doing with its mana each turn. And if you're using your mana on something which may or may not have a game impact until quite a bit later on, if you play this against an aggressive, say, Zoo deck, there's a good chance they just don't play a spell until very late in the game, and you've just fallen super far behind. Similarly, against a Shaman deck, you can fall very far behind just against Trogg into Totem Golem, and don't necessarily have to play spells to interact with your board and actually ever give you the Catterick. It is okay against Feral Spirits. You kill half of a Feral Spirits for 2 mana, but that's not really a great either mana or card-based exchange rate. So this is a card that I think will potentially pair quite well with Cloaked Huntress, but I don't think is a particularly powerful card on its own, and I'm kind of questionable as to whether it will see significant competitive play. All right, let's talk about Rogue. We saw 2 new Rogue cards at the reveal. There is Deadly Fork, which is a 3/2 with Death Rattle. Add a 3/2 weapon to your hand. My understanding is the 3/2 weapon is also 3 cost. So this is kind of an interesting card because it is in itself just a 3/2 for 3, which that body is not very good, but giving yourself a 3/2 weapon from the Death Rattle is a pretty high value effect, and it's also a reasonable tempo effect because you can use that weapon to kill multiple minions over a little bit of time. It gives you effectively an Eaglehorn Bow in your hand. Eaglehorn Bow is a good card. Obviously, without the trap trigger, Eaglehorn Bow would be a little worse, but we've seen Paladin decks playing Rallying Blade, and that because they are just reasonable cards to begin with. So you're getting decent value and decent tempo from the fork itself and from the weapon it gives you. And I think that a lot of people have said oh well, it would be so much better if it went into play. Well, obviously it would be better if it was like a Arathi Weaponsmith style effect, but there's a huge gap as well between a 3-attack weapon and a 2-attack weapon. So getting a 3/2 weapon from this versus the 2/2 you get from Arathi Weaponsmith. Also, this is a 3-cost body as opposed to a 4-cost body, so it can be sort of a more aggressive tempo style of play than Arathi Weaponsmith is. I think this is a card that a lot of people are kind of sleeping on. I think that this has the ability to be a potentially powerful tool in a kind of like mid-range-ish rogue style of deck. And that's something that I really like trying to play. Most of the rogue decks that see play are very like spell-based, combo auctioneer style decks. But I'm sure that Deadly Fork is a card that I'll be playing at some point, and I have to imagine that other people will find some power in this as well. So I think that Fork is a card that's kind of a sleeper and will likely show up in competitive play at some point. So the last rogue card in the set is Swash Burglar. This actually combos very well with the Ethereal Peddler that we saw before. Swash Burglar is the third type of rogue stealing burgles type effect that exists right now together in Standard, and the combination of all those may make it so the Ethereal Peddler is a deck, that you can play a deck built around these. Swash Burglar, the Undercity Huckster, and Burgle all together give you a lot of ways to kind of steal things from your opponent's class, and potentially with the Ethereal Peddler can give you, a way to use them more efficiently. But this just by itself, it's a 1/1 for 1, which obviously not super exciting, but much like Babbling Book, a 1/1 for 1 is much more exciting in Rogue than it is in a lot of other classes because of the hero power. Rogue has the ability to deal 1 to a minion with the dagger that it creates with its hero power. So Swash Burglar plus a use of your hero power can easily take down an opposing 3/2. And it can do it with value because the Battlecry gives you a random card for your opponent's class. This is, a pretty reasonable thing in like a more sort of controlling style of rogue deck that you might find people building with, Huckster and Burgle and Swash Burglar and whatever else. I could easily also see it in something like a N'Zoth rogue deck or just, other sort of controlling style of rogue deck, because something which gives you, this both sort of not tempo advantage because you're just trading your 1-drop and your hero power on 2 for your opponent's 2-drop, but it gives you some value there as well because you're getting the Battlecry effect that gives you the extra card. So I think this is a card that will definitely show up in at least some competitive decks. It's also a pirate, which is not trivial when you consider how many pirate synergy style cards there are. There's more pirate warrior cards these days than rogue, but definitely something that's worth keeping an eye on this card, and I think this is a card worth keeping an eye on. All right, there's only one mage card that wasn't already revealed, and it's actually my favorite of the mage cards in the set, Medivh's Valet. Battlecry, if you control a secret, deal 3 damage, a 2/3 for 2. This is a awesome control mage style card. As I've mentioned many times, I love control mage style decks. It's one of my favorite types of decks to play in Hearthstone. And in many cases, I'm always looking for like early plays for those decks because they don't really want Sorcerer's Apprentice, they don't really want something like Cult Sorcerer, and they want to have something that they can actually play early in the game that can compete with the opposing board. And this is exactly that. This is something that can compete for the opposing board in the early game, but also has a very effective impact if you draw it later on. It's one of the sort of tensions in a lot of control and mid-range decks in Hearthstone is that you don't have the same role of early game cards that your opponents do, but you're in many cases drawing from much the same pool. This is a card that I don't think is likely to go into like a tempo mage deck, because most of them don't really tend to play much in the way of secrets these days. Though we may see more sort of Kirin Tor Mage secret style decks with Medivh's Valet that are a bit more aggressive. But I think this is great in a deck with, say, Ice Block, that you can almost guarantee the fact that, I have Ice Block, so I'm going to have a Fire Elemental effectively attached to a 2/3 body. I think this is one of the best cards in the set for sort of any overall archetype, and I'm really excited to build control mage decks with Medivh's Valet, Battling Babbling Book. He'll be battling. He'll be getting in there for one. He's a battling book. But yeah, one of the cards that I'm most excited to play with because it fits exactly into the style of play that I like. So hopefully other people agree as well. I know Strife Crow does. And we'll be out there grinding out with our mage decks, and you'll see. You'll see.